Hello guys, I hope you are doing good. In today's video we are going to be taking a look at my game where I actually played in Blitz on chess.com and I crossed 2800. So this was actually the game where I was 7 points down to 2793, and basically I was paired against a player who was 2700, around 2730, and if I would win that game, then I would cross, or actually I would have exactly 2800 rating. So let's take a look at the game. This game was played, and I played as black, and I played against a player from Argentina. So it was interesting. The game started with e4. He was white, I was black, and I went for my main opening, the Sicilian defense. He went knight f3, going for standard stuff, and I went d6, and now he went d4, the classical open Sicilian setup where black usually either has to instantly take on d4 or just play a move knight f6 and try to play around and strike around the e4 pawn, where after knight c3 black has to capture, and now we would enter actually the normal typical open variation. So if we go back and at this case, I took on d4 instantly instead, and he played queen d4. He actually played this move, which is not the main line. The main line is knight d4, but this queen d4 move might seem a bit suspicious at first, but actually it's not suspicious because this move knight d4 overall generally is basically, this move queen d4 overall generally is leading to very stable setup for white, and this queen being early coming into the game, she's basically okay here. She's not wasting her time because she's coming from d1 to d4, and now after the move like knight c6, yeah, black can strike the queen, and in Scandinavian that queen has to move, but now white has a move bishop b5, so the things are completely different at this case, and this seems quite okay theoretically for white. So this line is basically called check over variation, and this line is most likely used to actually completely confuse black, and black is not going to lead game in so aggressive way because white will basically pick up very safe and solid spot in the position. And now beside bishop b5, there's queen e3 also here, where black can play g6, and after, let's say, c4, there can be bishop g7, knight c3, knight f6, where both of the players are pretty much having pretty standard and normal development. So instead, in the game, what happened was bishop b5, and now went bishop d7. Also, it's worth saying over here that black can also do the move a6. The idea is to attack the bishop, and if the bishop takes after bc6, yeah, black got bishop pair, black got the pawn on c6, black got the pawn on a6, which is maybe a little bit waste of time. Still, black got the open b file, and I can say this is pretty solid position for black, but I decided to not go into this because from the past I had a little issue with this structure. The main issue with this structure is to activate overall the black's pieces and get some activity. So this is different, see, this is different, and now I decided to play bishop d7. My opponent decided to take on c6. In one of the standard games, I had the game where my opponent played queen d3, and this is some source of the another available move where white is actually just trying to keep the queen on the d file, trying to keep the defense of the bishop, and this line is kind of interesting because it can lead to some very interesting situation where black can actually simplify everything and bring the game very close to the end game, because after knight e5, knight takes, pawn takes, bishop takes, queen takes, and after, let's say, queen takes, knight takes, black is just doing completely fine. There will come rook c8, there will come e6, and black is putting the pressure over the c file, even though black has the center pawns which are doubled, and white has a pawn majority on the queen side where he's having 3 against 2. That's basically not so clear in this case because black can try to compensate this with the pressure among with the c file. So instead of this one, what kind of happened in the game is the idea with bishop c6. After going bishop c6, white basically decided to give the bishop pair, and in this situation what kind of happened is a move bishop c6. So we got bishop c6, and now white goes knight c3. This is first little inaccuracy in the game, and with this move knight c6, knight c3, white is basically developing the knight, but he's no longer allowing himself to go with c4. So that's a massive difference in the position, because later in the game black will be available to try to play around d5, to play knight f6, to push d5 and get some source of activity. So instead over here, instead of going c4, white went like this. We got knight f6, white went bishop g5, very nice move to set up the pressure. Also the first piece who is crossing the black side of the board, going to pressure a little bit black side of the board. And over here white is already preparing something like bishop f6. Let's say, for example, black goes for casual a6 move, which is not a good one. White can just capture. We got g takes f6, and now after going either long castle or short castle, there's nothing pretty much going on in the position for black, because black is not available to pick up any threats, cause them in the white's position and set up the pressure. Yeah, black has a bishop pair, but that doesn't mean so much, because white has a very healthy pawn structure. So all of these pawns, they all look very, very healthy, and I can't really find if there are any issues for white. So going back to this, I decided to play e6. Yeah, e6 is kind of leading to the problem, which can become a real problem, and that's the d6 pawn. But this is very typical for Sicilian, and for some lines in the Sicilian, one of the lines where this structure is typical and it automatically goes into that line is Richter-Rauser variation, where is black doing something like this, and in that case, when black already does have and push these e6 and d6 pawns, black's bishop is usually on c8. Right here, the bishop on c6, so that's the difference. Also, the black's bishop is usually on e7, where then the bishop back is on d7. But of course, still there are some differences, and those lines are kind of connected in maybe some middle game ideas. But what is very important to understand for Sicilian players is that when we talk about these pawn structures, all the endgames, well, let's not say all, but most of the endgames are very, very comfortable for black. And when I say endgames, what do I mean is if the queen trade happens without any different pawn structure change itself happening, then that will mean that the endgame will be comfortable for black. So after this position, if white now takes on f6, that can lead to queen f6, exactly to the situation I talked about. gf, again, is not good for black. It simply leads to better position for white, and the main character, why is that going on, and main show is the queen on d4, which is basically doing great based on the queen on d8, which is suffering on the starting square. So queen f6 would be the continuation, and after queen takes gf, black is no longer having any issues. Black is having the bishop pair, clear bishop pair, the queens are off, and now if we talk from the tactical perspective, very little chance is that white can create such a good tactical ideas and attacking resources. While also in this case, what is worth mentioning is when we talk about the bishop pair, you are actually looking forward to trade of the rooks. Once the trade of the rooks is going on, so let's say in this position we have the same position without the rooks on the board, then black would be very, very comfortable, because the bishops would no longer have to fight against restricting pieces as like a rooks, which are their biggest opponents and the problems when it comes to giving their activity. So in this case, black's bishops would have more or less an easy situation if that would happen. Easier than this one, but still in this one black is doing great. So that could happen, and it would be good for black, but that's something which didn't happen. What happened is long castle, and now black decided to go bishop e7. Okay, I went bishop e7. The idea is very simple. Let's just keep developing. And now, of course, again, I would like to point what happens if this bishop f6 quickly, bishop f6, queen takes d6, and now queen trade, and after rook d6, bishop c3, giving up back the bishop pair, going bishop takes c3, ruining the pawn structure, and after bishop e4, this simply feels very comfortable for black. So I can't really find any issues for white as well, any issues for black as well. There's a rook on d6, he's looking fine, but any other than that, white doesn't really seem, it doesn't really seem like, seems like white is going to create clear pressure and clear idea and clear attack, so no clear threats, which is very good for any chess position. You know, when you would like to actually make sure what is going on in the position, the first thing you're asking yourself is who can make more threats, or are there any threats currently on the board. So now after this position, we got rook from h to e1, very logical move. White is looking forward to bring the rook in the center of the board, so basically bring the rook in the game. Also the black, it's worth saying that the black king is in the center, so the black king can kind of struggle there if white brings some more attacking resources. Of course, black is no longer in the problems if he castles at this point. So first of all, I could castle instantly, and that was probably one of the best lines, slightly better. I decided to play h6, and maybe this h6 causes little weaknesses over here. It also leads to this, which is something that my opponent missed in the game. And after going queen d6, rook d6, here after bishop c3, b takes c3, the difference is that this pawn is actually defended by the rook, and taking him is simply impossible. So right here, white is up a pawn, but after king e7, black should be still available to easily handle the position without so many issues. In the previous one, most likely black would try to play for a win, while in this one black would struggle a little bit and try to make a draw, which most likely would be the result. But again, the difference between this position and the one over, so the difference between this position and the one over here, where's that one? No, that's not this one. That's the one where, okay, where black instantly castles. And this one over here is when over here black actually doesn't, is not down a pawn like in a second case. So my opponent missed that. He went bishop h4, and I was quite happy. I played queen a5 here, and that's very, very interesting move. The main idea of this move is, of course, putting the queen away from the starting square, activating the queen, and also trying to view and take a look at the around the white's king, ask white some questions, and try to make sure that black can actually at some point raise b5 and raise some serious attacks around the white's position. So in this case, if white captures, that is also going to be pretty much unclear, because after bishop takes, queen takes, bishop c3, b takes c3, queen a2, it pretty much seems like black is actually running very serious attack around the white's king. And according to the very deep view, after knight e5, this position is not clear at all. Both of the players are having very dynamic chances. Both of the players are having very suspicious kings. But honestly, I would like to point that by looking at this position right now, I would actually add a little bit of value in the white's position and give him a better position, because the knight is, first of all, the knight is in the center. That knight is most likely better than this bishop. That's the number one. And number two, the king seems like he can't move. At least white king can always try to run around this way. So that most likely would be a main difference. So that could happen in the game. However, luckily to me, it didn't happen at all. My opponent decided to go back bishop g3, which is kind of wasting of time. The reason why this is a waste of time is because white is having some threat, but that threat around d6 is no longer an issue because black has a tempo move e5, which turns out that this bishop on g3 is now wasting serious time. So now what happened in the game was queen d3, white goes back to d3, black goes rook c8, and here I missed the chance to actually get slightly better position by doing the move b5. b5 is actually cool move here. It puts the pressure around the white's position by preparing b4 and then queen a2. However, I went rook c8. For me, I thought that this is also fine because I just put the rook on the open file, and of course this is one of the ideas which is making a lot of the sense. However, it's not the best one. And my opponent found knight d2. The point of the move knight d2 is that this knight, who is not so useful on f3, is coming back to d2. He is going to be rotated either to c3, c4 or b3. And let's say I play casual move like h5. That would be very serious mistake because after knight c4, white is launching the attack on the queen and the pawn, and now the d6 pawn, who is one of the typical weaknesses if we talk about this Sicilian structures and generally the pawn structures. The main reason why his weakness is because he's a backward pawn. So the character of the backward pawn is very simple. That's the pawn in the back, so in the back of the position, who is no longer having support or will no longer have any support by the pawns. And the pawns are best defenders, so no longer having any support is simply causing problems to additionally defend that pawn. So that's why I had to be very careful here to not lose this pawn, and I found b5. My opponent went knight b3, I went queen b6, making sure that the queen is staying active in the game, and here white played the move king b1. This is the first serious inaccuracy by white, and the reason why this is inaccuracy by white is because this king move doesn't really do so much in the position. I could understand that if the king was under the threat directly, this move as a typical move when the long castle happens, king b1 would be okay. However, over here that kind of wastes the time, and this is not the best move for white. The best move for white, due to my king being in the center, was to actually try to play f4, try to put the pressure, try to play active, and try to ask black questions. But instead my opponent went king b1, and the game from this point turned to be very, very dynamic and very, very unclear. So what happened is b4, I just gained a tempo attacking the knight, and here he went knight d5. White has to play knight d5 because let's say he goes back, there's simply bishop e4 where white can resign. So white went knight d5, I went bishop d5, he went e takes d5. It's worth mentioning at this point that it's actually better to keep the bishop pair on the board, go bishop b5, try to play around short castle now, and here with f5, a5, rook c7, rook c8, black is actually putting a lot of the pressure, and white is not having an easy plan to escape the attack. So I went bishop d5, that wasn't the best decision, but it happened what happened, and after e takes, I finally castle. It's worth mentioning that at this point when I castle, that was a kind of, it looks like it's a late castling, but actually this is on time, because before my opponent was never available to launch any serious castling stuff, any serious attacks around my king, which didn't castle, and simply now when I castle, that's simply completely fine for black. I'm no longer going to be late in anything, so that's why I was pretty much happy in the position. Now what happened was knight d2. My opponent decided that his knight is not doing so much on b3. I went a5, logical move to try to put the pressure on the queen side, because usually if you are better on one specific side of the board, the rule is that you are going to put the pressure there because that's where most of your pieces are actually putting the attack on. So now after knight c4, black goes queen c5, white goes b3. It's worth mentioning that here something like knight e3 runs into rook c7 and a4. White pacifies the knight on e3 is no longer doing so much, he's closing off the rooks. He can jump to f5, but that's gonna be, that's anyways not so dangerous. So after this situation, white decided to play b3. The good part for white here is that he kind of stabilized the knight on c4. He's looking good, but the pawn structure around the king kind of looks very, very suspicious in this case. And this is no longer so easy for white at this point. It seems like black is putting the pressure, white has to be careful, and the things are not easy at all. What happened for me was a4. I'm keeping my ideas of putting the pressure on the side of the board where I'm actually having most of my strongest pieces. White goes f3, stopping e4, and now rook d8. My initial idea was to bring the bishop back to f8, was trying to simply make sure that that bishop is safe. Also, I was trying to not allow my opponent any motives where he can sacrifice on e5, push the d pawn, and cause some problems around my bishop. So now, at this case, what happened was rook e2, he went for quiet move over protection, and here I went rook c7. The idea is very simple. What I want to do is simply I want to at some point make sure that I can get the pressure around the c file. So I went rook c7. He went bishop f2, logical move to move the queen from the active square. We got queen b5, and now white made a mistake, which on the first look doesn't seem like a mistake, and that's the move bishop b6. This turns out to be very serious mistake. Let's go back and examine what is kind of good in this case. What is the best thing in this case for white is to simply go knight b6. The reason why is because he should trade the queens since black is putting the pressure in the position. So white is trying to play more positional, try to take the pawn on a4, and once the black, for example, let's say this happens at the position, queen d3, rook d3, and let's say black takes, white can take here, and this pawn is under the trouble. Let's say a3 happens, white goes back, knight c4, this knight is a forever knight. This is very problematic for black, and I don't see very easy game for black. Also, white is looking forward to play the move bishop b6 soon. So, what happened in the game instead, my opponent went bishop b6. As I'm saying, on the first look, even to me, I was thinking, okay, this is done. I'm losing the game. There's attack on the two rooks, the rook on c7, the rook on d8, and it pretty much seems like white is achieving a lot while black is not going to get anything, like just white is going to suffer. However, the tactics, the mother of chess, saved the game, and not only it saved the game, but brought the game to the completely winning position. In this game, what kind of happened is a brilliant move, rook c4. The reason why this is a brilliant move is because, let's say white captures the rook with the pawn, there's queen b6, the two pieces are simply dominating the rook, and let's say white captures with the queen, there's also queen b6. Black is also winning the game because black is simply having two pieces for the rook. But eventually what happened in the game, and it kind of scared me, but I actually calculated this, was the move bishop d8. And it also looks like, well, black has to take bishop d8. After that, queen c4 is happening, and now white has two exchanges in the position where he's actually not losing anything. So white is completely winning. Actually, instead, what is amazing in this position is this move, rook d4. The brilliant move, attacking the queen and leaving the queen, sacrificing the queen, leaving white to capture the queen for free and eventually bring the game, or not actually win the game. What is going on over here is after queen b5, rook d1, king h3, there's a very beautiful checkmate. The white's king can't really move, his tower is taken, and black is completely winning the game. So, after this situation, there is no way for white to save the game. Let's say he tries bishop e7. What kind of happened in the game? There's simply rook d3, and after rook d3, knight d5, black is threatening knight c3, and black is threatening knight e7. So this is very serious problem for white. White is at least going to lose the exchange because let's say bishop d6, after knight c3, rook takes, pawn takes. Now black is simply winning this endgame. Black is having the queen against the rook and the bishop. Of course, the technique has to be showed here, but this endgame is completely winning. So going back, there's also one more thing which white could try. He could try here after after rook d4, he could try to sacrifice the queen, but after e takes, let's say bishop takes, there's queen e2, the rook is hanging, so the queen is going to also take the free rook and attack the rook and the bishop, so it's done anyways. But in the another way, there was also rook e7, where the game is also finished after knight d5. Black is threatening to play knight e7, pick up the rook, go knight c3, make a fork, and at this point the game is over. Thank you guys for watching this video. I hope you will like it. Please let me know in the comments if you would like to see some other line or some other Sicilian line, and how did you like the game. Thank you for your support, and I'm glad to see you in the next video. Bye!